What are the symptoms? It's very, once you know what you're looking for, it's quite easy to spot the disease. You have an uneven brood pattern, so you have gaps in the brood. The larvae become twisted in the bottom of the cell. Instead of sitting in a nice C shape in the bottom of the cell, they're all twisted. They become yellow and melted down, so they lose their segmentation. And the gut, instead of being brown, is sometimes very creamy or white, and you get a nasty smell as well.
Symptomerne, det er så et hulmøbeleje. Det er larver, der ligger i bunden af cellen i forvredne stillinger. De kan ligesom smelte ned, og de gulner, men den leddeling, som de normalt har, forsvinder. Tarmen kan blive cremet, mælkehvid, og så lugter det ilde.
So, you can see the larvae in here. They become twisted and yellow. Hopefully, if you saw this in your colony, you would know that there is something wrong with it. But yeah, so you've got gaps in the brood, and they all look very sick in the bottom of the cells.
Det er så tidlige symptomer af europæisk bipest. Man ser det hulle yngleje, man ser larverne, der ligger i cellerne, forvredne og krøllet sammen, og man ser visfarverne. Og hvis man ser det her, så vil man forhåbentlig være klar over, at det er galt.
And again, this is a little bit further on. The larvae have started to deteriorate a little bit more. It's very unpleasant.
Her ser vi så et senere billede, hvor larverne er i anstrengt nedbrydning, og det ser ikke godt.
And this is a larva that we've taken out of the cell. You can see this area here, this is the gut. And you have yellowy, creamy areas and white areas. And this is just full of the bacteria.
Det her er så en larve, der er taget ud af cellen, og man ser tarmen, der er gullig, men med hvide pletter, hvide områder, helt fyldt af bakterier.
So how do the bees in a colony become infected, or where are the bacteria? The bacteria can be found pretty much everywhere within a colony. If you do molecular diagnostics, you will find it in the honey, wax, propolis, obviously within the infected larva within the brood, but you will also see it it will be found in larvae which are not showing signs of the disease, and also on the house bees.
Og man finder i en syg bifamilie, finder man bakterierne de her steder i honning, i voks, propolis. Man finder den i ynglen, også i ynglen, hvor der faktisk ikke er kliniske symptomer, og man finder den på de voksne stadier.
Again, the cycle of bacteria within the hive. The bacteria are brought into the hive after contact with an infection source.
Bakterien kommer ind i familien, når de får kontakt med en eller anden smittekilde.
It might take months for the disease to fully develop. It's very much dependent on what is happening within the colony.
Det kan tage måneder før sygdommen udvikles. Det afhænger meget af, hvad der sker med livsfamilien, hvordan den har trives.
It depends, a lot of it depends on how much food the larvae are fed. If you have a large number of nurse bees to larvae, then the larvae will be fed better and they may survive better.
Udviklingen af sygdommen afhænger meget af, hvorledes larvernes ernæringstilstand er. Hvis der er mange andre bier i forhold til larver, så får de meget fødder, så får de meget foder, og så vil de overleve bedre. Modsat, hvis der er få ammebier i forhold til larver, så stresses larver.
Sometimes a bee inspector will go out, carry out an inspection, go back to do treatment. When he did the inspection, he will see lots of clinical signs, but if he goes back and to do a destruction or a treatment, he might actually find that the symptoms have cleared up completely. It's very much a stress disease.
Og det forekommer, at når inspektøren har set sygdommen i får det konfirmeret og kommer tilbage og skal behandle, så er den forsvundet, fordi i mellemtiden så er bifamilien fået nok næring, og der er en rigelig med foder til larver. Så det er meget høj grad en stressbetinget sygdom.
The cycle is the bacteria are fed to the larvae within the food by the nurse bees somewhere between 3 to 5 days. So this after hatching up to 5 days.
Bakterien kommer til i larverne her, når ammebierne fodrer larverne, kommer ind i larven her i løbet af larvens 3-5 dage alder.
The bacteria develop in the gut, and what happens is that the larva will actually normally starve to death. So, and the larva will normally die about at day 7 or 8, just prior to capping, and that's when you'll see the clinical signs that you saw in the pictures before.
Bakterien udvikles ind i larvens tarm, og larven dør faktisk af sult, den kan ikke føde. Og så dør den der på dag 7-8, lige før den egentlig skulle forsejles, så er det, man ser symptomerne. Nogle larver overlever, hvis de får rigeligt med føde.
Sometimes the larva will survive, depending on what point they were infected, and before they pupate, they will void their gut contents into the bottom of the cell. And this can act as a potential source of infection. When the nurse bees are cleaning it out, they will pick. This is where the nurse bees pick up the bacteria.
Hvis de der larver er inficeret, men overlever, de skider i bunden af cellen, så deponerer de et depot af bakterier i bunden af cellen, som så ved senere rengøringsaktivitet fra ammebierne kan spredes til andre.
As I say, in some cases, the larva will actually die after the cell has been capped. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes, and maybe look a little bit like American foulbrood. You'll have bees will chew through the cappings.
I nogle tilfælde så kan larven også løbe efter cellen er forsejlet, og så kan der komme andre bakterier, som tager over, og for eksempel Bacillus larvae. Og det kan give et lidt forvirrende indtryk ved diagnosen.
You say you have sometimes a secondary invader, Bacillus larvae, which will take over the cell, and you will get a brown mush is the technical term, I think, in the bottom, which looks very similar to American foulbrood, but it doesn't rope. So when you put a matchstick in it and try and pull it out, you don't get the roping. And it also will form scales, but they're very, very different to American foulbrood scales because you can actually take these out quite easily.
Symptomerne kan så komme til at ligne under bipest, fordi bierne laver selvforstrækningen op, og indholdet vil se brugt ud, ligesom hos underarten bipest. Men det vil være sådan en brun svineklat, men det vil ikke være trådskrækkende. Desuden så vil det også kunne den sorte skæld, ligesom det er underarten bipest. Men i modsætning til underarten bipest, så kan skælden her den fjernes.
How does it spread between colonies? Unfortunately, the beekeeper is the biggest agent of spread of European foul brood. Whether this is moving colonies from areas where there is no disease to where there is disease, or whether this is through practices moving combs between infected combs between colonies. One of the practices in the UK that some beekeepers do is equalisation in spring, and all they end up doing is making sure that all of their colonies have European foul brood.
Spredningsagent. Det kan ske ved, at man flytter bifamilier fra områder med sygdom til områder, hvor sygdommen ikke forekommer. Det sker også, når vi flytter travler rundt mellem bifamilierne. Og specielt på foråret, når vi laver udjævning af bifamilier, så flytter man eventuelt sygdom mellem bifamilierne og får på den måde spredt sygdom i deres steder.
But you also have these the heavily infected colonies become weak, and then they will be robbed out by stronger colonies picking up the infection. And this is just the cycle. So you have the house bees, which are infected. They feed the young larvae, which then develop into showing clinical signs. They die. The nurse bees will try and clean these out. There will be bacteria in the bottom, and more nurse bees are infected, and round we go.
Og her ser vi så cyklus i billedform, hvor stadig de udvikler sygdommen. De fodrer larverne, der får sygdommen i sig. De bliver inficeret, viser symptomer. Og når de døde, jamen, så renser stadig de døde larver ud, og så spredes de på den måde.
Now I would like to talk a little bit about how we look for the disease within England and Wales. We are responsible for honeybee diseases in England and Wales, but not for Scotland. Scotland have their own inspection service.
Nu vil jeg sige lidt om, hvordan man laver undersøgelser for sygdommen i England og Wales. Skotland har deres eget inspektionssystem.
But we do talk to each other.
Men I kan godt tale sammen. But I thought Scotland was moving away from.
They are, but they still. They've had actually within the last 2 years they've had a very large outbreak of European foul brood, and they have a much smaller inspection service than we have. So we provided them with a lot of advice and our experience to help them control it. But in the UK, European foul brood is a statutory notifiable disease, which means that if you suspect that you find it, you have to contact the authorities.
Fordi lille kommentar fra Skotland, så har man inden for de sidste år haft store problemer med europæisk bipest. Men tilbage til England og Wales, der er europæisk bipest en anden sygdom.
I've mentioned bpest. It's a database where we hold a large number of the beekeepers in the UK. There's no compulsory registration, but on bpest we have, I think, nearly 27,000 beekeepers. So we have a very large proportion on there, and we use this as part of a risk-based, targeted inspection program. So.
bipest, databasen over bilavlere, registreringsprogram er nævnt, og det bruges. Der er ikke nogen lovpligtig registrering af bilavlere, men i bipest har man registreret 27.000 bilavlere.